Yeah, it's different in the US. I mean, here there are no consecutive life sentences, right? So the maximum you're going to get is 25, no matter
Yeah.
what happens. So it's a different situation over there.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. So
Mm.
I'll be a criminal in Australia.
Exactly.
Welcome back to Briefly Creo. We're episode 4. So today we're running through some of the biggest headlines in the crypto space, but we're also extremely honored to welcome a special guest today, Danielle Marie. So if you're listening to this because you're into crypto, you likely know of her. If you're a newcomer, then you definitely need to know her. So Danielle is a distinguished blockchain educator, a crypto enthusiast, community leader, and she is the founder of Women in Digital Economy. It's a platform empowering women in Web3 and the creator of All Things Blockchain. So it's a nonprofit fostering for growth of local blockchain ecosystems. She was recognized as well last year as the Australian Blockchain Leader of the Year by Blockchain Australia. So welcome, Danielle. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're very honored to have someone like you. Our first guest actually on the podcast as well. So it's very exciting times. And being a female.
Oh, well, that's exciting. I always love being the first.
We're going to throw you under the bus first. But we're going to get straight into it. We have lots to cover today. So first article we have right now is the Sam Bankman-Fried. He's sentenced to 25 years for FTX fraud. This article is from The Verge. So Sam Bankman-Fried, he's the co-founder and CEO of FTX. He's been sentenced to 25 years in prison for fraud, despite the shorter sentence than prosecutors requested. It's still a significant development and pretty lengthy time frame. Danielle, did you expect this result?
Well, originally they were saying that he, I think it was like 125 years and he was going to spend his life in prison, was, kind of the original headlines. I think that 25 years, good behavior, how much, he's going to be paying people off. I would put a prediction of he's out in under 5 years. Put that on the prediction market. Start placing your bets.
I think a lot of people would be upset with this outcome.
Yeah.
He burned a lot of people in the space. And given that the maximum was over 100 years, 25 seems kind of light. His lawyers asked for 6, I think. So, 6 there would have been riots on the streets if he got 6 years. 25, he'll be out before he's 60. Who knows what's going to happen then.
Yeah, I think it's disappointing because it doesn't, they say, setting a precedent, but it's not really. I just can see him getting out with good behavior, and because they're not physically violent kind of criminal charges. Yeah, I predict that he'll be out earlier, which is quite disappointing.
Yeah, if he's out in 5 years, it will be very disappointing. In terms of the sentence, I did think at the end of the day, when judges go through these things, they have to take into account like the whole spectrum of offenders. And on the worst end, you have people who commit fraud purely to steal money from others, just pure scam artists or something, and maybe they steal intentionally, millions of dollars from retirees or whatever it is, and those are the ones that will need to get the maximum, like the absolute worst type of sentencing. And on the other end, you have the unintentional guys. And let's be fair, he's on the higher end of that scale, but at the same time, the judges try to say, look, if they give this guy 120 years, then the next guy who's actually stolen $1 billion intentionally of a bunch of vulnerable people, he should be getting 200 or 300 years. Now, I think it's the scale that they worry about, but I still do think he should have at least got like maybe 50 or 60, or 25 does seem a bit light. But I think that, without reading the case in detail, I think, it could be because he managed to establish the fact that he didn't actually have malicious intentions, and that could happen. Somebody could be like, oh, look, I was reckless. I wasn't paying attention. I used this money recklessly, but I did think I could make money and get it back, etc., etc. I had no intention of actually stealing it. I didn't use it for myself. Like, all that kind of stuff could potentially reduce the amount of sentence he gets. So I guess the judge ended up thinking that 25 was appropriate. As I said, I think 50 and 60 would have been probably more, a bit better, but it all depends on the evidence at the end of the day and the judge's thoughts.
What do you think he's going to do when he gets out?
It's a good question.
Depends on how much crypto he's got stashed.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'm sure he has lots of crypto stashed somewhere already, right? But I'm sure he'll still be able to. He'll probably be fine, financial wise, for the rest of his life. I think whatever happens. But in terms of what he can do, in career wise or anything, that's probably over.
Yeah, I did hear that the new CEO or whatever, they're actually like trying to bring FTX back into business. So that will be interesting to see if that happens and if they'll be able to turn it around and make it a successful exchange and if people will trust them again. So it'll be quite interesting.
Yeah, there's this whole discussion about, well, a lot of the customers are actually going to get their money back, or it looks like they're likely to get their money back. The question is, should that factor into his sentence? In the article, it said that the judge considered it and said, well, no, it shouldn't, just because he stole people's money and betted on the casino and used the winnings to pay back doesn't mean he didn't steal the money. And I think I tend to agree with that. But for everyone who did get burned by the FTX meltdown, it's a good outcome that it looks like most people are going to get at least most.
But they're only going to get the money back of the price, Bitcoin at the price that it happened, which is like at the lowest point. So really, they've still lost.
True.
Yeah.
No, I agree with that.
It's much better than the alternative, but it's something, but it's definitely not what they actually got back. And that's what they do. I mean, at the end of the day, with all this sort of liquidation and whatnot, they work with dollar figures. They're not going to work with the value of the cryptocurrency, like as in the amount of the cryptocurrency. It's a similar story with Celsius. So the Celsius investors, don't quote me the exact figure, but I believe they end up getting 75 or 80% of the investments back at the end of the day, at the end of the 1 or 2 year process. And I know somebody who had money in Celsius, and yes, they got about 75, 80% back, but that's 75 to 80% of the dollar value of the cryptocurrency at the time when it was all frozen. So, it's definitely better than nothing, but it's not actually how much it would be today.
Yeah. And putting the sentence into perspective, I mean, the article mentions Bernie Madoff as well. Bernie Madoff got 150 years. And it says he was 71 when he went into jail, and he died 12 years later in jail. But, 150 years, I mean, the FTX disaster was at a similar scale. I mean, it was billions of dollars, right? So, yeah, I don't know what the difference is.
From what I've heard, his family is quite connected in the political world. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's a little bit of corruption or favoritism because of the kind of the status of his family's political strings.
Yeah, for sure. That's always a possibility. I think him and Caroline Ellison are both well connected in Wall Street.
But on the sentencing, on that comparison with Bernie Madoff, I find it strange that they argued it in that way, because normally when judges give sentencing, they take into account someone's age. So a life sentence if it's supposed to be a life sentence for like a 30-year-old might be 30, 40 years or whatever it is. But for a 70-year-old who's got bad health and they won't last that much longer or something, they might only give him 10 years because that's already a life sentence to that person. So an older person would typically get a reduced sentence considering the age that they're already at. So I'm not sure why they're trying to argue that Bernie Madoff got 150 years, but SBF shouldn't, because if Bernie Madoff got 150 years when he's 70, then SBF, if the crime is comparable, he should get even longer sentence. But anyway, that's how I understand criminal law usually works.
Yeah. Yeah, it's different in the US. I mean, here, there are no consecutive life sentences, right? So the maximum you're going to get is 25, no matter what happens. So it's a different situation over there.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. So I'll be a criminal in Australia.
Exactly. Yeah.
Next up, we have an update from the European Parliament. So they've scrapped a 1,000-euro limit on cryptocurrency payments from self-hosted wallets as part of the new anti-money laundering laws. So David, we've been discussing the proposed regulation here for some time. And obviously there's a lot of mixed responses to the EU's regulatory measures and a lot of discussions and reporting taking place. Where do you stand and what are the impacts of these rules?
Yeah, so this is one example of the cryptosphere misreporting and everyone getting up in arms over something that wasn't even true. So initially, even big news sites went out with the wrong information. months ago, they did originally propose to bring in laws on self-custody wallets, MetaMask wallets, for example. But that was scrapped in the final version. And so now what the final version will say, and it won't come in even until next year, is it only covers, crypto exchanges and crypto asset service providers. It just implements the travel rule, which is the rule that says that if there is a transfer of funds, the sender, the receiver, the amount need to be known. When you're dealing with an exchange, everyone already has to be KYC'd, their identity is already verified. So there really isn't much of a change from the perspective of someone who just wants to buy or sell crypto. What they originally proposed would have gone much, much further. This is really just consistent with what the anti-money laundering laws already say and already do in TradFi, with banks and so forth. Yeah, the sirens definitely went off in the crypto sphere, especially on crypto Twitter. But what they ended up with isn't as severe as what people thought.
I think I need to maybe understand a little bit more. Well, how are they putting a limit? Are they talking about a limit from being able to transfer from a centralized exchange to a self-custody wallet? Because you can't, they could put limits there, right? Because the exchanges have that capability of asking you, like, I don't know if anybody's ever used centralized exchanges, but SwiftX is one that I can think of, and it asks you the type of wallet and where you're transferring it, and then they have the ability to say, "No, we're not going to transfer your money to that wallet." So they could stop it there, but once it's in a self-custody wallet, how are they going to put limits on a self-custody wallet? Like, that's the whole purpose of self-custody is not having censorship put onto what we can and cannot do with our own money. So I can only see them being able to stop the on-ramp through centralized exchanges. But then you could just do, okay, well, I'm just going to do $400 or $500 payments, and then once I've got it into my self-custody wallet, then you guys can't tell me what to do with my money.
Yeah, I think that's probably part of why that got scrapped as well. I mean, just in terms of enforcement, that would be impossible to actually execute. I mean, the only way it would work is when they somehow manage to link a self-custody wallet to an identified person. Then they can say, well, okay, you're not supposed to send this much from that wallet. But that's just, it almost defeats the purpose, right? Like, I mean, if you can identify them, or like you can just create a new self-custody wallet, like it just wouldn't work. So I think that's part of why they would have scrapped that.
And it would cost a lot of money in auditing. What are you going to do? Pay somebody there to, do reports and track down self-custody wallets that have done transactions over $1,000 to then find out, okay, well, now let's go and find out who actually owns that wallet so we can chase them up. It just seems like a waste of money that would be, being spent on trying to audit people doing transactions over $1,000. But they did try. I don't know if you guys remember a few years ago in Canada when the truckers were on strike and the Canadian government tried to get MetaMask to stop the transactions from the RPC level. And but what I think that they need to realize, okay, well, great, you could shut down that from MetaMask, but if I've got my private keys, then there's like 15 other wallets that I can use. So I think that they quickly realized that, oh, okay, we would have to get every single decentralized wallet application to block every single address simultaneously to stop these people from being able to receive funds.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, it's like trying to stop crypto in general. Like, I think they've all realized it's impossible. I mean, you'd have to shut off the internet, right? So, and doing something like this, is equally as impossible. I mean, there's no limit to the number of wallets one person can set up. Like, one person could have 3,000 wallets if they took the time to set them up. So it's they've reined it in a bit. So they've realized that it's just it'd be impossible to enforce this type of rule anyway. And the most sensible approach is to get the exchanges to do some of the work, and that's what they're doing. Yeah.
And enforcement is going to be an interesting issue because, Danielle, what you mentioned just then is similar to what we discussed last week on NFTs, because we were talking about how it might be hard to enforce. Like an NFT collection can infringe copyright, but the problem is how do you take it down? And it's a similar story where you can't stop. It's on the blockchain. You can't get rid of it. You can't stop people transacting on it. But one approach people have taken is to just try and get OpenSea or at least some of the other bigger NFT exchanges to take it down. And that's about as far as you can take it, because people can still, they can always transact privately. They can always use another NFT exchange that's hasn't been issued with a DMCA or anything like that, or one that maybe decides to ignore DMCAs. But outside of that, that's about the most you can do. And I think if this becomes more of a thing, enforcement in the blockchain space legally is going to be a pretty interesting topic.
Well, I think the main problem is, from my perspective, is that these people that are trying to implement certain types of rules or regulation, and I'm going to use Apple as a really kind of good example. I don't know if you guys remember when they were like, we want 30% of the network fees. And we're all like, how can you do that? You clearly don't understand the Ethereum protocol. So I feel like these whoever is sitting around these big round tables of these companies or, regulation bodies, they don't understand the technology, and they're just saying, okay, well, this is what we want. These are the rules that we want to have, but they don't actually understand it on a deep enough level on how the technology works that it's not possible what they're asking.
Completely agree. Yeah.
Next article, we have a Cointelegraph one. It's Women in Crypto, Contrasting Industry Dynamics with Traditional Sectors. This article is incredibly fitting today as we have our guest and crypto expert Danielle here to share firsthand her own experience and insights. But yeah, despite exponential growth in the crypto world, gender diversity remains a really big challenge. So this article, just to summarize some of the stats that they had, until 2018, women accounted for only 8.5% of all crypto investors worldwide. Although there has been lots of progress, with women now representing, I think it's at 37% of global crypto holders. There's still a notable shortage of women in core development and technical roles within blockchain and crypto companies. So no doubt a lot of challenges there persisting, with women holding only about 6% of the top leadership roles in the industry. Danielle, where are our ladies?
Good question. There's so much to unpack there. I am clearly a massive advocate, and that's why I founded Women in Digital Economy, because there's this constant narrative of we need more women in the space, we need more women speakers, we need more women leaders. And I'm like, okay, well, what are we doing to solve that problem? So Women in Digital Economy's mission is to actually just kind of mentor and also help upskill women that are maybe industries where they could easily kind of transition their current role and skill set, but kind of into the Web3 industry. And then also, because it's so vast and wide, try to kind of help them figure out where they might be interested. Okay, would you be interested in like working in NFTs or DeFi, or, do you want to work in the gaming, or do you want to be a developer, or do you want to focus on cybersecurity? Like there's so many verticals. So that's kind of the whole vision behind it. It kind of also, like, I'm a massive advocate for women coming into this space, but I feel like it's natural. There's certain industries, whether it be teaching, whether it be mining, whether it be construction, like we don't hear of the narrative, we need more women in construction because it's a male dominated industry. Like I don't hear these types of narratives, but for some reason it's this huge narrative that we need more women into the crypto space. So I find it a bit funny. And, if we think about evolution and we think about, biologically, like women, we naturally generally tend to fall to more nurturing roles. That's why we're more nurses and more teachers and more. So I think that we just need to not focus on that we need more women in this space. I think that we just need to focus on how can we maybe make it a little bit more of an inviting space, because one of my kind of issues, I am working on a few Web3 projects, and it's all males, right? And so you have to kind of have a little bit of a thick skin sometimes when I call it like crypto bro land, and kind of how they communicate with each other, and then they kind of forget that you're a female, and so you kind of it's very different from, say, like the corporate world, right? So a woman that maybe has been kind of involved in this kind of corporate world, and there's an HR department, and there's all these policies policies and procedures and all this sort of stuff, and you transition into startup Web3 world, it's a completely different world. So just kind of helping educate them a little bit, also helping them feel kind of welcomed, giving them the kind of the education. Women are a lot more conservative, so that's why it takes them a little bit longer to invest their money. There's a lot of stats, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but I've heard it time and time again. If there is a job role and a woman will feel like she needs to almost have all of the requirements of that job role, rather than a guy, if he's got like 60% of it, he'll just go for it. So it's kind of more of a, a confidence thing as well. And that's why I've founded Women in Digital Economy, because I have so many women that I've mentored that I'm like, no, like all of the Web3 businesses need all of the skills of the Web2 businesses. So all you need to do to get into the industry is learn the language and the terminology, and then you can start, and then you can just kind of learn as you kind of progress through and go down multiple rabbit holes. So yeah, I would like the narrative to stop focusing on, we need more women in the space, to how can we just help educate and invite more women into the space.
How did you actually get into the space? Just a little summary. What tips could you give to other women as well who are wanting to kind of get into doing something like yourself?
So I got in late 2017, and I had an online network marketing business at the time, and I was just looking for other avenues. I wanted to transition. I'd been on hospitality for ages, and I hated it. And so I was just exploring lots of opportunities, and somebody introduced me to Bitcoin, and I just went down a rabbit hole. I went to every meetup I could go to. I would listen to every podcast, and I just kind of jumped in, though. I have a little bit of a higher risk profile. I just threw some money in it because I've kind of got a bit of that gambler side. And I was just like, oh, if I invest this $5,000, if I lose it, it's not going to break me. And if I make money, then great. So I always recommend having some kind of, never invest more than you can kind of afford to lose. And then I just went down rabbit holes, and it took me about a year before I really realized the power of blockchain technology and how it was more than cryptocurrency. And I think it's really important for people to learn the difference between cryptocurrency and blockchain, and the power in behind it. And then that's when I discovered the advanced diploma and diploma of applied blockchain. I was the first international student female to enroll in those programs and then complete them. And while I was studying them, I knew that they had a shortage of trainers. So I was also getting my qualifications to teach. And yeah, the rest is history. So just start. That's my advice.
And on that topic, I guess a common question that people in the crypto industry or into crypto get from non-crypto people is, where should they start if they want to learn more? So where do you tend to point people?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I get it asked a lot. The best place to start, is just to start, okay? And it really also then depends on your type of learning style. So for me, how I personally started was going to community events and just learning. So generally, for example, All Things Blockchain, we host an educational event every month. This month, we talked about the Bitcoin halving and the impact that would have on the future of Bitcoin. But then you also learn from the people that are there, and then you get connected, and then you kind of get put into groups. So that's definitely one way, is I think just tapping into the community. And there's meetup groups all over, Australia and all over the world. So I would just go into Meetup and look for some local blockchain or crypto meetups. Secondly, there's an abundance of information online. Okay, Google, crypto Twitter is great for news. YouTube. But the problem for beginners is sometimes there's so much information that you don't know where to start. You don't know what information you need to know first, and you don't know what information is really kind of critical to protecting yourself, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. And that's why I created the Crypto Basics for Beginners course, because I wanted to, that's what I specialize in, is just helping people kind of remove all of the noise and the big jargon and the fancy words, and just being like, this is what you need to know. Okay, yeah, do you need to know what proof of work and proof of stake and the differences and the consensus algorithms and how the mining works and all that sort of stuff? Not right now. What you need to know, though, is what your private keys are and why you need to keep them those safe. And later down the track, you can go down a rabbit hole. And so it's just really quite critical for them to kind of learn the very basics. So yeah, I would just say, yeah, follow and podcasts. So one of my podcasts that I listened to, it was called Web3 Academy. They have rebranded to Milk Road, but that is my number one for people that are wanting to learn about not just crypto, because they do market watch and everything, but they also talk about businesses that are being built and how this technology is being used in a business application, not just necessarily making money. So summarize is do my crypto basics free. It's 100% free. And then build from that and tap into your local communities.
We will be sure to put Danielle's details in the show notes so you can check out her website and all her courses because they're amazing.
Oh, and one last thing, anybody that is living in Queensland, they can study the diploma of blockchain with me for free at TAFE Queensland. So anybody can study it, but it's just a bonus if you're in Queensland. You can study it for free because it's on the TAFE free program here. And it will be for the rest of the year. And we'll hopefully they'll keep it on there next year as well.
Look, we've got a few more headlines to get through, so I'm going to push on to the next article. Spain has ordered a temporary ban on Worldcoin's eyeball scan, citing worries about personal data usage. This move raises broader questions about the balance between technological innovation and individual privacy. So, Sandy, what are your concerns and implications?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. The background to this, obviously, so what they're doing is Worldcoin has been putting all these iris scanners around and basically saying that you can scan your iris here and we'll give you X amount of Worldcoin. So they're basically getting paid to put their own biometric data in the hands of a private company. I think that's the main concern here. I mean, we don't know exactly what they want to do, but this is Sam Altman, the OpenAI CEO and founder. I expect he wants to do some pretty big things. The whole project is supposed to be about decentralized ID, and that's an interesting field. The concept has been around for quite a few years now. Before during the last bull cycle, which is 2 or 3 years back now, there's already quite a few crypto projects that started in this space. So I think the holy grail for a decentralized ID system is where you have your IDs stored securely on the blockchain. From my perspective, I think some sort of zero proof ZK rollup system where you can then prove basically that you are you without necessarily divulging all your personal data to somebody else. MyGov is sort of doing something like that at the moment. They're actually trialing a thing through MyGov ID because for everyone in Australia, you should know that you can use your MyGov ID for various things like, log into your Centrelink, etc. MyGov is wanting to trial a system where somebody else, they can have a third-party API where somebody else can, any other business who wants to verify their customer's ID can go through MyGov ID. So the person just signs into MyGov ID, prove that you are you, and then all that the third-party business gets is this proof that yes, this person is who he says he is, and they don't get anything more than that. So that's a similar concept to what a decentralized ID system would do, but the holy grail is where you don't need to give that to anybody, right? So you can prove that you are you without anybody actually, a third party that is actually holding that data. Now, I don't know if that's quite what Worldcoin is trying to do here. The concern always is if there is a third party that's holding all that data, including your biometrics or your iris scan, your maybe in the future your fingerprints or whatever else. What happens if that's leaked? What if this company uses it unethically? And that's all the sort of thing that comes to mind when a private entity is holding all that data that's very personal to you. Like I said, a decentralized ID system, the holy grail is to solve all of that, but I don't get the sense that Worldcoin is doing that. And so that's where all the privacy concerns will be arising from.
Yeah, from my understanding, Worldcoin isn't trying to do proof of a digital ID. They're trying to do proof of humanity. So because one of the issues in the space at the moment is bots and wallets, and how do we actually prove that it's a human that is behind that wallet address that is interacting with our platforms? So from my understanding, and I haven't dived deep down this story, but the first thing that popped to my head was I just thought all it was your eyeball gets scanned, you're proved as a human, you get this wallet identity, but you weren't actually disclosing, your name and your address and your email. Like, you weren't giving all of your personal data to them. I thought it was just basically proving that this address, this wallet address, is actually connected to a human. So that's what I was under the impression. So then I kind of wonder, okay, well, where is the privacy concerns coming? Unless, like, I haven't gone and scanned my eyeballs, and I don't know if they are collecting and attaching the person's digital identity to the proof of humanity, then obviously that's maybe a problem for concern as to how they're storing that data. But I think if they're just doing proof of humanity, I don't see the issue. What are they trying to protect?
Yeah, if that's what they're doing, I mean, that's always a question. I mean, if you listen to Facebook, they apparently don't do a lot of things with your private information as well. And I can understand there's ways to de-identify data and all that sort of stuff. But the biometric data here, I mean, in an ideal world, you don't store that. All you store is the fact that, as you say, this wallet address is now tied to a human. But in the same way, I mean, somebody can come along, prove that they're human, get this wallet address, and then hand the keys to somebody else who can then use it as a bot address. So there's got to have ways around that, and I'm not sure how they propose to solve this in the future. But in some way, I think the data needs to be, the person might need to re-verify in the future, and I don't know how you can re-verify without necessarily storing some biometric data to prove that it's the same person or things like that.
That's true. Yeah.
We'll see how that develops. But the concern now, I guess, is like, well, maybe, I don't know if they're saying that they don't actually keep this biometric data. You'd have to look at the terms, and I don't think these people are necessarily getting the full terms before they come and give away their biometric information. But I'd be very surprised if there's nothing there that says that they can use the biometric data or keep it for research purposes at least. And that's how these things start, and I think that's where the privacy concern comes from. And data, with privacy, a lot of the times you realize that once this data is out there, there are ways you can potentially link it up in the future with other identifying information, and somebody can use that from separate sources to build a whole profile of you, and then suddenly they have all these pieces that you never would have gotten it from one location. But yeah, once you piece it together, it's often enough to actually commit identity fraud, and that happens quite commonly online.
Yeah, I had no idea just how far along they were. I mean, the article says that 360,000 people in Spain have signed up already, which is a hell of a lot of people. And that's just one country. So like, I can see like this issue excites me and scares me at the same time. Like, I can see why you would want to establish proof of humanity. But at the same time, like you say, like how easy it is now to steal someone's identity, how does that interface with the fact that people's eyeballs are being scanned, as we move along, fingerprints, genetic data, even the potential for abuse is really where the concerns are. And, it is a private company. So what government oversight is there? What do people know about their plans, right? What do they actually want to do? And will there be any repercussions if they don't actually go through with those plans and do something else? So I think that's where there's potentially a lot of concern.
I agree. It's a exciting, interesting, unprecedented. Every time you solve one problem, there's another problem to be solved. And that's what I think is so exciting about the Web3 space.
Next up, we have a CoinDesk article. It is the Ethereum Foundation is under scrutiny from a government authority, raising questions about the future of ETH and potential SEC classification as a security. This comes amid efforts to offer ETH as an exchange-traded fund and significant changes in Ethereum's technology. David, how do you think the recent inquiries and investigations into the Ethereum Foundation and ETH could, I guess, impact the future of Ethereum and the broader cryptocurrency market?
Yeah, it's this type of development could be easily dismissed as FUD, except for the fact that the Ethereum Foundation arguably has one of the longest histories in the space of, doing the right thing, I suppose, or not doing the wrong thing. They removed their warrant canary from their website. They did a commit on GitHub that indicates that they have been contacted by an authority. It's hard to know really what it means or what the inquiry is. It could end up just being something that is not hugely impactful Obviously, if the SEC does classify ETH as a security, that will make huge waves, especially in the US. It won't be contained in the US, though. It will be something felt around the world in the cryptosphere. But it could easily also turn out to be a fact-finding mission by the SEC. If you look at it from one perspective, Bitcoin is not something that can be attacked because there is no centralized entity that has any influence at all over the network. It is, as decentralized as you can get. Whereas with Ethereum, you do have the foundation. It doesn't control the network, but it does have influence. So that is sort of the weakest link, I suppose, where you can target that link and potentially influence the entire network. We'll have to wait and see what happens here, but it's something to watch carefully for sure, because Ethereum is massive and there's a lot at stake here.
I think it really kind of depends on where you're getting your information from. But there's a few things to take into consideration. One, the SEC has been out, trying to subpoena or sue different parties after they have, granted, say, a futures product, after they let Coinbase go and be an IPO, which means that they have actually already done their investigations and deemed that these were not securities, because they have already kind of allowed, these IPOs and, the futures ETF to be approved. There's also something where the CFTC has basically deemed and said that Ethereum is a commodity and it falls under their jurisdiction and not the SEC. So I think that it's going to be interesting to watch to see how this kind of unfolds in the next couple of months. And I think a lot of this is leading up to the ETF approval that's going to be happening in May. And I think that the SEC is just doing whatever they can to try to stop it. But from what I've listened to, it's more them fighting to say that it's going to be a security. But I personally don't think that will happen in the long run, but it will be interesting to watch.
Typical us, we've gone a little bit over your time, Danielle, and I know you do have to head off. I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show with us today. Our first guest, we really, really value your time and your input, and I know everyone listening will agree. I will pop all your details as to where to find you, and I'll include them at the end of the episode as well. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And I really hope anybody that has any questions around education, where to get started, feel free to reach out to me.
Where's the best place to contact you?
LinkedIn is usually the best place, or you can send me an email at hello@DanielleMarieXYZ. But LinkedIn is usually the best social platform to just connect with me and then send me a message.
Next up, another CoinDesk article. Ripple enters stablecoin fray with US dollar pegged token. So Ripple, known for the XRP ledger, is launching its own stablecoin pegged to the US dollar, aiming to tap into the growing stablecoin market. The token, backed by US dollar deposits and treasuries, will be deployed on the XRP ledger and Ethereum blockchain.
Yeah, look, I'm almost surprised that Ripple is doing this while they have this fight going on with SEC. But it might be interesting, but the question is how the uptake is. I think Ripple, they've definitely been behind the race in terms of getting user base onto the blockchain. For the most part, I mean, they've had some apparently promising use cases for interbank transfers, because when they were launched, they were very much focused on speed and this interbank transaction sort of idea. They have some limited smart contract capability. Definitely nothing as flexible as the likes of Ethereum or Solana or whatever. But they often like to say that they do have smart contract capability. They are fast. There are some concerns with centralization, but in that sense, it's really no worse than Solana. So they say that theoretically, they can become a hub for DeFi applications and whatnot as well. And I think that's why they're trying to garner more of this market share by issuing their own stablecoins. That went pretty well for USDT when they launched. From my perspective, I'm not seeing anything that really stands out. They say things like 100% backed by US dollar deposits, short-term US government treasuries, other cash equivalents. That's really what USDT is supposed to do as well as USDC. it's always cash and cash equivalents. In that sense, I can't see them doing anything better than the current options. So I think they're going to have a bit of an uphill battle to take market share away from USDT and USDC. But at the same token, rising tide will lift all boats. So if crypto keeps going up, they don't need to take that much away from the others. All they need is maybe if they manage to capture even 5 or 10% of a market that's growing so rapidly over the next few years, that they might well still carve out their own space by doing that. And I think that's really what they're after at this point. They don't want to be too far behind the race.
Yeah, I mean, one thing Ripple has, which I've never really understood why, is a loyal user base. They've consistently, through thick and thin, always had a lot of support, on crypto Twitter and elsewhere. I admit it's not a project that I've followed closely. I have some concerns about what I know about the project. But like you say, they are very much behind the eight ball in terms of releasing a stablecoin, and particularly when it's going to be a centralized stablecoin, just like USDT and USDC. But it brings up another discussion about, okay, what are the benefits of a centralized stablecoin versus a decentralized stablecoin, or decentralized stable asset that's not necessarily pegged to any fiat currency. I think there's a place for both. As the pie grows, then as long as you've got some slice of the pie, then you're going to have growth and you're going to potentially do very well. I'm not sure what the adoption will be with Ripple. I can't really see it coming anywhere close to Tether or USDC at this point, with the ongoing dark cloud of its legal troubles with the SEC. I think it's going to be difficult for major crypto businesses, and for that matter, any institutions or institutional investors to really back this new stablecoin.
I guess we'll have to watch how that one plays out. Next up, we have a Cointelegraph article again. Recently, it's the US Department of Justice. They made a big move involving roughly $2 billion in Bitcoin connected to the infamous Silk Road marketplace. This cryptocurrency, previously seized by authorities, has been transferred to a new wallet, sparking questions and discussions about its future. David, the Department of Justice held the seized Bitcoin for a few years, I believe, before selling a portion of it last year. Why do you think they waited so long?
I really don't know, but it does raise an eyebrow that they held on and just happened to be starting to deal with it when Bitcoin's at its all-time high. Sandy mentioned the other day that these government processes, they're not fast, and I agree with that to some extent. Maybe it was just luck that now they've got the necessary internal approvals to start selling some of these assets, and Bitcoin happens to be at its all-time high. No matter what they do, these sales won't be on the open market on an exchange. But more broadly, the whole idea of the government owning a lot of Bitcoin or a lot of crypto is something that people always talk about. We had Ed Snowden recently say that there will be other governments announcing that they've been accruing Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And I think it'd be really interesting this year just to see what happens on the broader global stage in terms of where is crypto going, how legitimate will it get, and what are other nations doing in the context of all these developments in TradFi with the Bitcoin spot ETF and other developments, the ongoing narrative of institutional adoption in the space. It'd be interesting to see where that goes.
In terms of governments announcing that they have been acquiring Bitcoin or something like that, I feel like that is something that, look, it may happen in the future when obviously the crypto market grows to a certain point. But right now, I feel like the governments that may have acquired Bitcoins already tend to be at least not the major developed countries, because it's going to be very, very hard for government to be able to pass any sort of internal due diligence to actually use taxpayer funded revenue to buy Bitcoins, despite everything that they say themselves about the risks of Bitcoin. So I would find that very difficult to believe, but I can totally see other countries, especially the smaller countries, who maybe they often have issues with funding. They do have their own budgetary problems and all that sort of thing. And they might have decided, you know what, we might as well try a hand at this. And I can see that happening. Or there could be other smaller countries who are trying to now vie for a space as a digital technology leader, blockchain leader in the space or something. Not unlike what I guess El Salvador is doing, or other countries like, how Cayman Islands have now become a country that's very much associated with the crypto industry. Governments like that, they may have been acquiring Bitcoin already, and they might announce later on that, yes, look, we do have Bitcoin holdings. But yeah, I don't see anything like US or any of the EU countries or Australian government to come out and say, look, actually, despite all our warnings all this time, we have been slowly accruing Bitcoin.
It's interesting because if any nation state was to make any other substantial investment in a traditional asset, based in another country, they would need foreign investment approval, right? We have the FIRB in Australia that handles those types of investments. But when it comes to crypto and Bitcoin, there's nothing of the sort. So a nation state, much smaller nation state, could quite conceivably acquire quite a lot of Bitcoin, and no one would really know until they came out and formally announced it. There could be quite a lot happening in the background that we're not aware of. And I agree with you. It's the smaller nations that have the most to gain from this, and who I suppose have less to lose. If you have the right people in the government with the right interests, then it's something that could happen quite easily.
Next up, and last headline for this episode, SEC committed gross abuse of power. Another CoinDesk article. A federal judge has ruled that the US Securities and Exchange Commission must pay legal costs for Debtbox, a crypto company, after finding that the SEC engaged in a gross abuse of power in its case against the company. Sandy, you are undoubtedly our go-to person here. Tell us about the ruling and the challenges and responsibilities of regulatory bodies in this space.
This is something that I would find very hard to believe that would happen in Australia. I think in the US, there's much more of that adversarial culture going on. Like in Australia, the rule, I believe, is the same here in the US. When you're a lawyer or a barrister arguing in front of a court, you are first and foremost an officer of the court and then a legal representative for your client. So that is to say, even in the pursuit of your client's interests, you may never mislead the court, because you're a court officer. That rule is probably a lot more strictly followed here. I think it's a lot to do with the legal culture as well. There's no barrister here in Australia, or no reputable barrister in Australia, or lawyer for that matter, that would willingly try and mislead the court because the client asks you to. But I think in the US, it's very different because of that more of that focus on the adversarial side. Just some of the stuff I hear coming out of Trump's lawyers' mouths. It's just, I just don't know how they make some of these statements. But look, this is, I think, a case of that, where the SEC the lawyers in this case have clearly overstepped based on the judge's comments. They have said things that about where the funds have moved to, etc., that simply weren't true, and they have misled the court to try and get that result of freezing this company's funds when really they didn't have the proper evidence to show that funds are being moved, are likely to be moved. I mean, that's really what this judgment comes to. It's got nothing to do with the merits of the case itself. It's purely about that freezing order that SEC wanted, which should never have been issued if facts were more accurately presented. As the company says, they were never moving the funds. There's no evidence that they were trying to move funds offshore, so there was actually no basis for the freezing order. And the judge agreed to the point that they've asked SEC to pay the costs in this case, and basically got a very serious talking to in the judgment. That's the kind of thing, like, at least in Australia, that's the kind of thing that could amount to unsatisfactory professional conduct or unprofessional conduct. It could be the sort of thing that the judge, you could even be contempt of court, or you might potentially lose your license over this. Like, this is not the sort of stuff that you would do lightly, and that is like misleading the court intentionally. So again, I'm surprised to see this, but I have seen this kind of thing happen a lot more often in the US court system, where it seems lawyers are willing to go further for their clients.
Yeah, I mean, this is the type of story that it seems like we're missing something. There's some people that are just that brazen, but I would be very surprised, like you, to hear about something like this happening here. This case, it also brings up the SEC's approach to date of regulating by enforcement. And obviously the SEC is a very large institution, so there are probably multiple teams doing this type of work. Ruling by enforcement is one thing, but trying to pin down a business by misleading the court is another thing entirely. And it just boggles my mind that this, even happened. And I'm glad the judge, gave him some harsh words. And, the SEC's official response was, we're reviewing the decision.
Yeah. There's another interesting point here, because there's a split in the profession in Australia between barristers and solicitors that doesn't exist in the US. What that means for a government entity like the SEC, though, I believe what will happen is that the SEC the internal counsel, they will say, internal counsel who also is a solicitor for SEC, may well just go ahead and be representing SEC in this case. Whereas if it was in Australia, you have the government solicitors, yes, but then they will also hire an independent barrister to do the actual court work. And there's a sort of stopgap there where the barrister will say, well, hang on a second, look, I'm not misleading the court here. He's not giving me the right evidence. I deal with judges in other cases. Like I'm sometimes hired by other lawyers. Like I'm not willing to risk my career to mislead the court for you. Whereas for the SEC, it's just like, well, like if it's an internal lawyer doing it, they may actually be pressured to go ahead and do this by SEC's internal department. So that's another thing that I think differentiates Australia and the US in this kind of scenario.
True.
Yeah, that's a good example of one benefit of having a split profession. I think it confuses a lot of people who are not in the industry. And to be honest, it confused me for a while.
Yeah.
But, that's one sort of inbuilt protection against something like this happening that exists in our industry, but not over there in the US.
Look, I think that concludes today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to episode 4 of Briefly Creo. It was a real pleasure having our special guest, Danielle, on today. If you are keen to hear more from her, you can contact her or follow her on LinkedIn or head to our website, daniellemarie.xyz. But yes, until next time, we will be collecting all the new newsworthy items to bring to you. Feel free to reach out to us on social media as well to share your thoughts or any questions you have. Bye for now.